discussions, which we'll get into in just 1 minute. So as we've done in the past, what I wanted to do was open up to public comment in case anyone has any comments. I would ask if you're from the RTM or you're involved in the budget process and want to comment on the budget, I'd ask that you wait until we get into budget discussions. This is really just meant for the general public to offer any comments before we start our meeting. And do I have anyone who would like to speak? I don't see anyone. Jim, do you?
Nope, I don't see anyone.
Okay. So before we get into the budget discussion, we do have a transfer we need to address. And so this is for Public Works. I don't know if Ed is on the line yet. I don't see him, but Jen, why don't you take us through that?
We do have Tony Campanella.
Oh, I missed that. I'm sorry.
Let me turn on his video. Everybody's moving. I see what you mean, Jim, about the list moving around. All right, and I think we have.
There's Tony.
Yeah. All right, and I do not see Ed yet, so let me just get Tony able to speak.
Okay.
Tony, welcome.
Thank you. Where's Ed?
There we go.
Ed, can you hear us? Ed, can you hear us? You're on mute. There you
How
go.
about now?
Perfect.
I'm sorry, I have trouble with my microphone every time I try to get on here.
Not
Good
to
evening.
worry. All right, so we've got your transfer for town hall renovation. Would you and Tony like to discuss that?
Sure. I don't know if you all met Tony Campanella, but he's on with us tonight. He's our facility supervisor. I'll get right into the transfer. The project we're talking about is our town hall security. It includes security cameras as well as securities for our rear door key fob system that we'd like to install. We've been waiting about 3 years for this to get done. We had started originally with security cameras around the town hall facility. Sorry, the Mather Center had already included theirs when they built the building. So we were trying to piggyback and add on to that. But with some work with Kate Bush, we came up with some additional work, which was to include the rear door and some security measures there so people could come and go and have the residents come in through the front door and secure the building a little bit better. We do have originally have funds totaling $45,000 right now. We did get a quote from a state bid contractor, the same one being used over the Darien police facility. The bid came in around $46,000, about $19,000 over. Now, originally, when we put together this budget for the security cameras, we were going to have DPW staff run the wiring and install the cameras like we had at the Norotan Heights train station, and the Darien train station worked out very well for us and saved us quite a bit of money. But due to the magnitude and complexity of this job, we decided to package the security doors and the cameras together in one and get a bid. We thought that was a better product. It's going to be turning out a little bit better too, and I'll talk about that in a second. The transfer we're requesting is from the Town Hall Renovation Reserve to cover the additional funds. The scope of work includes about 23 cameras. I'm not going to get into too much detail. I was reminded by the first selectman last night we shouldn't maybe talk about our security measures too much, but I want to let you know they're totaling about 23 cameras additional to the 16 already at the Mather Center. Those areas and locations have been vetted by the police department with us to make sure that we provide an effective and efficient system to make sure we cover our building. We do have a video recording system. They will not be monitored 24/7. It does record and hold it for 4 or 5 weeks. The recording that'll allow us to go back and look at anything if we had to. When we are done, we will have a consistent system with the Mather Center, so it'll be on one portal so that we can see all the cameras all at one time. If you have any questions, myself or Tony are here to answer them.
Did you guys get multiple bids for this, or how many contractors were involved?
We didn't. We went through the state bid. We used the vendor over the Darien Police Facility only because they're using the same key fob system that we'd like to use at the town hall. They
Okay,
are a secure bidder through the state, and we felt that not only the references from the other towns that we had, they also were able to you put together the same system as the Mather Center. So we thought this vendor was the best, being a low bidder through the state, also the best fit for us.
what about sort of ongoing costs, like maybe cloud storage for the video or all of that? Is that incremental to what we have in place right now, or is there significant extra sort of ongoing expense to maintain all this?
I'm sorry, go ahead, Tom.
So at this point, we're storing our video on the local server. We're not archiving to the cloud at all. So there's no recurring cost. And with a state bid, we actually get the kind of the annual camera licenses remain at no cost.
Okay, terrific. Anybody else from the board have questions for these gentlemen? No? Okay. All right. I'm certainly supportive. This is just another chapter in a lot of the security measures we need to put in place these days in the 21st century. So I guess my only other question, was there any controversy with the Board of Selectmen on this? I haven't seen the tape or any concerns.
I did not notice any last night. It was pretty straightforward. There was a couple questions about storage and viewing, but that was the only talk of the meeting.
Okay. All right. Motion to approve. Rob, second. Dan, all in favor? Okay, 5-0. Terrific. All right, gentlemen, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Okay, we'll move on to our budget deliberations now. Before we start that, though, I did want to take just 1 second and maybe clarify sort of a few things with regard to our buddy system. So for viewers not familiar with that, by way of background, several years ago, we came up with what we call a buddy system, and it is a way for the Board of Finance to collaborate with members of the RTM and mainly F&B as part of the budget process. The reason this came about was that in the old days, we used to meet with department heads and do it individually, where the Board of Finance would conduct meetings with Board of Education department members, the town, and ask all of our questions as part of our process. And then we would vote on the budget and recommend an appropriation to the RTM. And then they would promptly repeat the entire process and meet with department heads and the Board of Education and police, everybody. So what was happening is we had a lot of redundancy built into the system. So in an effort to make things more efficient and as a courtesy to our town staff to try and make things easier for them, we created this system. So the purpose of the buddy system is shared fact finding, if I had to describe it succinctly. And so the idea there is that, again, in the old days, when the system first started, members of the RTM who were involved in the budget process would pair off as buddies with members of the Board of Finance, so that when we met with department heads or posed questions to them, we did them jointly. Again, shared fact finding. And the idea was that as we gathered our facts, the RTM would gather their facts, so that when we made our own decisions about the budget, we were doing it from the same set of facts and questions that only had to be asked one time. So the last 2 years, a couple of things have changed. One of them is that we tried to make it more efficient by eliminating a lot of the town department head meetings. And we've done that largely, where now really the only meetings we do are with the major departments. So police, for example, Darien Library, Board of Education and the superintendent, and maybe a couple of others. But we've eliminated a lot of other smaller budget meetings by going directly to Kate and Jen with our questions. Another thing that's improved is that the presentations by the Board of Selectmen and Board of Education are now televised and much more easily accessible than they have been in the past. And so it's possible for anybody to get very well informed on the budget process simply by watching those videos. So we've had a little bit of a breakdown on the process this year that I want to address briefly. And I think the breakdown has resulted from a couple of things. One is Some members of the RTM, I think, are feeling left out of the process. Maybe this has not been as inclusive as it has been in the past, or they felt like they can't speak with the members of the Board of Finance or to addresses in our meetings. And I want to emphasize that that is not the case, and that if that is happening, then we want to correct that now. The buddy system was meant to be inclusive and collaborative and not exclusive. And so I want to make sure that that point is addressed very clearly, that that is not our intention to do that, and that to the extent anyone perceives that, why it's not too late to correct that as part of this process. At the same time, I think Zoom meetings have changed things a bit, and it's made participation in all these meetings a lot easier than it has been in the past. I don't know about you, but it's great to see such high levels of participation, not just in our meetings, but RTM as well. Everybody can participate because it's by Zoom and from home and really easy. Much better participation than I think than we've had in the past. And so because of that, it's been easier for RTM members, F&B, to join meetings, set up meetings, and try to get to collaboration that we really just didn't have in the past. And I've worried that we've gone from joint fact finding to feeling like joint decision making. And I don't want to intrude on the decision making of the RTM. The RTM makes its own decisions. The Board of Finance makes its own decisions. And so I think any resistance that you may have felt has been because we've tried to preserve this idea of joint fact finding, but separate decision making. And I think as a theme, we ought to try to preserve that going forward. So as part of a fix, the thing I want to emphasize is the following. One, to the extent that any RTM member, or particularly F&B, has got questions they want to pose as part of the budget process, again, in the spirit of the buddy system, what I'd love to see is we just share the questions. If we've got questions, you've got questions, let's share them, and then we ask them one time, again, to save town staff time. But if the RTM or F&B wants to pose questions directly, you should not feel like the Board of Finance is a gatekeeper. You are welcome to pose as many questions to whomever as you would like. Second thing I want to do is to remind all RTM members and members of the general public, if you want to address this board as part of the budget process or any other process, you're welcome to do that. I'd like to keep it efficient so we don't get into really long meetings discussing all this. But as part of each one of these budgets, I will ask at the end if anybody on the RTM would like to speak. And then, of course, at the end, if there are members of the public that want to do that as well, they could do that. But I will make sure you get included at the appropriate time. And then finally, just as a reminder, this is meant to be a collaborative process. If you feel like that is not happening this time around, you're welcome to contact any member of the Board of Finance, but particularly me. I'd like to address it and make sure we have a collaborative process. Okay, as usual, I've talked too long, but this collaboration and this comedy, to use the good senator's words, our prior Board of Finance member, is super important as part of the budget process, and I want to make sure that we do everything that we can to maintain that. So thank you for indulging me. Let's move on to the budget process. We have 3 budgets we're covering this evening. So this will be Public Works, Parks and Rec, and then General Government. So for Public Works this evening, in charge of that are Dan and Rob. And I know you guys have been working on that for in general on both the capital budget. Let me hand it over to the 2 of you and tell us what you're finding.
Yep. So I'll do Public Works. I'll start with that. And John, I'll just say Dan and I have definitely reached out to our, we'll call them the F&B buddies. So we're running Parks and Recs, police next week. What am I missing? Public Works, we're doing our Park Recs, police, and the one from last week. So we definitely had a lot of collaboration going, once again, from an efficiency standpoint, gathering all questions, getting them over to Kate and Jen and getting answers back, and then filtering those answers back to our respective buddies on our team. So I just wanted to start with that.
Thank you.
Okay. So Public Works, on the budget side, Ed, thanks for joining. Excellent job. $6,000 increase on a budget of $4 million, sitting at an increase of 0.15%. Dan and I and the F&B crew don't see anything there. I have questions mark. Once again, Ed, great job bringing that thing almost at a flat rate from the previous year. Moving on to Public Works Capital. Excuse me as I kind of look at all the little numbers here, but the kind of the usual suspects for us on the Public Works side. There's a variety of issues, and I'll talk about the last one. that I think has brought the most questions from both Dan and I, and also from our buddies. But just going through a little bit of things, truck replacements, equipment reserves, town hall. There's a pavement. They're going to repave the pavement down there for $75,000. Tree replacement, town hall gymnasium upgrades, external doors replacements, and then some landscaping. And then I'll leave the two big ones, which are the usual, the sidewalk rehab for $750,000. And then this year, the paving of $1.2 million. So one of the questions that came up from the buddy system again to us was, how do we evaluate our bonding policy? You know, how do we derive from our bonding policy? And, you know, one of the answers I always say it comes down to length of the project and the size of the project, right? That's kind of how we base the two things off of. And I would say toward the end of the end of how we're looking is when we kind of make a decision how we want to bond things within the budget, right? But traditionally, these items have not been bonded. So I just want to make sure our cohorts hear that. Edgerton property for $75,000, I think got a little play on us from a bunch of people. The $75,000 from our understanding is money spent for grading and seeding of the property. The concern I think that Dan and I had along with our buddies is what's the long-term plan for the property? So doing some research, and what's coming back to us is really this is going to kind of sit with the Board of Selectmen on what that property wants, what we want that property to do afterwards. And my understanding is within the next year, they like to sit down with the neighbors and talk about the usefulness and what they want to do with the Edgerton property. So Jen, if I'm missing anything there on the Edgerton property and you want to add some more commentary, please let me know, but that's kind of what we come back with.
Yeah, just to reiterate, there's no final plan yet. And the plan for that $75,000 that was put in the budget is really for grading and seeding to make the property usable for now for, you know, passive recreation, but with the idea that there will be a more concrete plan coming down the road.
Right, that was our understanding also. Questions on Public Works at all? And then I'm going to move on to just kind of a few other funds that we have.
Hey, Rob, question on the paving.
Yep.
On the 1.2 million, is that just general road paving or any specific sort of off-road projects?
My understanding is it's the general one, and unless you want some more commentary, if you want to add some more commentary, please do.
Oh, no, it is the general fund for the paving. We are in the process of right now with all of the gas company work being done and the water company doing the work for utilities, actually getting caught up this year. That's why I asked for just a little bit more than I usually do. I usually keep it around 950,000. This year I did go over $1 million on this fund for paving, but it's getting me the opportunity to get caught up with all of our roads that hitting the 20-year cycle or are in need of being paved. So we're getting really close. I think next year I balance back out again to doing 4 miles. This 1.2 is going to get me close to 6 miles, a little over 6 miles of roadway.
And Ed, as it relates to sort of pricing on this, I know when we had the Board of Ed capital tour, there were a few projects they're working on, and you said they were coordinating with you in terms of making sure that in terms of the purchasing power that we have.
They have used our vendor for paving to do their parking lots. That has been one of the cooperative efforts. They're working with us or working with the solar company that did our work. So there are times that we put our heads together, Mike and myself, and use the same vendor or put something out together that we can actually both benefit from.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And how much of Jen, does the town aid for roads offset that budget, or that's not a net figure, is it?
The 1.2 million is the total paving budget, but then we do receive town aid road revenue of about 340,000.
Right, okay, thank you. Okay, other questions for these gentlemen on Public Works?
I just wanted to add to Rob's comment on the Edgerton property that we think that is of the entire Public Works budget, both operating and capital. That's the one thing we think is worthy of a further discussion on our board as to whether to fund that work in advance of knowing how we're going to purpose that property. So, Jen, if you're keeping a list of things to return to, I think that's the one from the Public Works budget that Rob and I would point to. Thank you.
Okay, is it worth covering that a little bit? I don't know if even now, or Ed, if you had any perspectives as to that particular, the timing of those improvements, given the indecision on longer term positioning of that property.
Well, I think it should be noted that in speaking with the first selectman, that the idea was to make improvements up there, not spend money that you would have to undo later, with the thought that once we were completed at this phase, people could use it for passive recreation, whatever that may be. And I think her comment out there was, when you start to talk with the neighbors and get them involved and get the residents involved to come up with a final solution, what she didn't want to have me do was work that we'd have to undo. And I think we were very careful at putting together a proposal, understanding that we are going to do some grading. We're going to bring in some fill. We're going to remove some asphalt sidewalks, curbing, walls, dead trees. We're going to pull some of the debris that have come to the surface now after the senior center. The old senior center had been demolished. Now we're getting some, sorry, from rocks and concrete and brick. But all of that being said and done, when we were completed, we would have at least if you want to call it a grassy knoll of about 2 acres up there that could be used.
Okay. I guess the only other question, a little outside the budget, but just in the spirit of a quick look back, how has the Public Works garage turned out in terms of the investment that we made to upgrade that? Is that going to your satisfaction?
You know, John, I've always been honest about that building. It turned out fantastic. There's always one or two things you look back and say, you know what, if I'd done that thing just a little bit different. So we're tweaking a few things in there. One of them being the air exchange in the bays. That has always been an issue for building code and safety reasons. So these are things that we've learned along, and we've changed some sensors. We've changed some timing. We're now looking to save some money on heating costs there too. So that was one of the things that kind of cropped up and caught me off guard. The use of the bay, the wash bay, is just getting a ton of use. The equipment is being, you know, the longevity for the equipment is you're going to see a result there. And all the departments, all 3 departments over there are using it. So that's a great sign and something that we strive for, and we're getting a good use out of it.
Terrific. Okay. All right. Other questions or comments on Public Works before we move on to Parks and Rec?
Actually, John, I'm just going to cover really quick kind of the offshoot of Public Works. So that's sewer fund, parking fund.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was just looking at that. Please go ahead. Yeah.
So just basically 3 items I want to bring up to the board on here. Parking revenue, just so everybody understands, is being budgeted down about $280,000, which I think is correct, given who knows, you know, when people will be kind of going back into the city or using the parking facility. So I'm comfortable with that. Sewer revenue down about 32,000, just throwing that out there, just because it's a reduction of 32,000. And the other thing that I think that caught Dan and I's attention with a few other members was there's $100,000 for weather shelters in the Darien parking lot. So here's my understanding. Ed, tell me if I'm wrong on any of this. The $100,000 is basically using costs from all prototypes within the area and other Metro North stops, right? So that's basically the cost there. My understanding is the state will have a design for the Darien train station by December, but we want to put $100,000 into the budget post when that design is released in December.
All right, I'll get a little more specific for you, Rob, if that's okay. The Darien train station has a platform project that's coming out. We had pressed Metro North and the DOT Rails folks to extend the canopies. We felt that this would be a great time to do it. They pushed back, didn't think it was a good use of the money, didn't think it was a good use for the area. So in speaking with the first selectman and speaking with the DOT Rails director and supervisor, we've come up with a plan. We felt that putting up these shelters along the back of the platforms would be a way to go. They are 30 by 10. They hold up to 15 to 20 people. We plan on putting 3 of them on the westbound side, the New York bound side, and putting 1 of them on the New Haven bound side. And we felt that this was a great compromise. Now, the only thing that the DOT asked, it actually didn't ask, it was something we've always talked about is partnering up, is if we would purchase the shelters. So I did some quick estimates. I got a number for the one that's over at the Roden Heights. There's a shelter that's over there on the New Haven bound side. I got some rough numbers from DOT. So about $25,000 a piece, 4 times 25. That's how you got the $100,000 number. Just spoke to the DOT on Monday. They are having the architect design 3 scenarios or 3 styles for us to pick from. And we're going to try to get something by September now. Trying to get it into the 90% design drawing approvals, which come at the end of September. So, but we're moving this along quickly. I am very optimistic that we're going to get something over there that is better than nothing. I would have loved to see the canopies extended. They just didn't see that as a viable piece of the project.
Hey, Ed, are the architect costs, are we taking those or is that Metro North cost?
They've absorbed the architectural costs, the redesign costs for the platform, and the building of the foundations.
Interesting. Thanks for the color on that. More color. Any other questions?
Before we go to, sorry.
I was just asking if there were any questions, Jim.
Yeah, before we go to Parks and Rec, is anybody from RTM or F&B on that had a question or a comment from these deliberations? Okay. Parks and Rec, gentlemen.
Actually, I think, don't you still have sewer, Rob?
I'm sorry, we're not.
Yeah, I kind of clumped them all together.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So I just talked. I didn't have any commentary on sewer. There was nothing
Okay.
that I wanted to talk about.
Got it. All right.
But thank you for the reminder.
Yeah, all right. I'm keeping track of our timestamps here, so bear with me for a moment. So Parks and Rec, operating budget request is 2.0 million, an increase of $70,000 or 3.6% over fiscal 21. I'm going to go group by group, not line by line, but group by group, just to provide folks with a sense of where kind of the major pluses and minuses are. There's 5 categories, the first of which is administration, which is budgeted to remain largely flat. Modest increase in part-time salaries driven solely by wage rates. All other items in that grouping are, I think, literally flat to last year. The second group is beach and court facilities, which are budgeted to increase about $40,000 or 16%. There are small increases in seasonal salaries and training services, but the bulk of this increase is driven by security services, and an increase in security services to $121,892, 36% above last year. Folks might recall that the town hired West Tech to patrol our parks and beaches to ensure compliance with COVID-related masking and social distancing requirements. Initially, this was staffed with 2 individuals, but later reduced to 1. It became the same individual. He was a daily inspector for our parks and beaches, very well received by the public. I think it's fair to say, and Pam, please correct me if I'm wrong, that the town believes the benefit of having this service has exceeded what initially was just a COVID-related need, and that the monitoring and enforcement of our town codes at our beaches and parks, it's much more effectively handled by this service over the alternatives, which would be either pulling a Parks and Rec a staff member from doing their routine maintenance work, or a uniformed police officer having to intervene if there was a code violation. So, Pam, did I state that fairly? And so I'm seeing nodding, so that's good.
Very, very well put.
All right.
And it was just a very positive figure in the town that also could address general park rules that typically we don't get to do, without having somebody pulled from the office, and we're only there during the day, never mind the weekends and at nighttime. So really effective.
Yeah, and I think securing the service for the upcoming fiscal year doesn't bind us to continuing in the future. I think the last year was obviously hopefully a one-off. We'll see how it goes in the next 12 months, and make a determination at the next budget cycle. So I think this is a like an outside the box. Hey, this was really good. Let's not just dispense with it because we did it for COVID.
I'd also like to add one thing too, and the commission, Parks and Recreation Commission also increased the park permit fee by $5 to residents and non-residents, which alone, if we sell 8,000 stickers, which we normally do, that covers the cost. I mean, this patrol is just under $30,000, and we could bring in well over $43,000.
There you go. There's a new line item for printing, just a reclassification from a different Parks and Rec department. The third grouping is grounds, fields, and courts, budgeted up 11% to $213,000. This includes $20,000 for pest control, up from $5,000. We had to go back to kind of the old way, geese control. It's a safety issue, public health issue. The kind of outside the box alternatives didn't really work. The kind of the plastic swans and other things like that. So we're seeing this item back in the budget. It makes total sense. And facilities repair and maintenance is up 10% to fund the service of additional equipment owned by the department. And facilities maintenance is up modestly as the town moves to pesticide-free materials for lawn care. Organized recreation events are down, largely driven by the already mentioned reclassification of printing expenses. Finally, recreation facilities maintenance expenses are up 2.46%, driven by a modest increase in clothing, tools, allowance to equip supervisors with safety equipment. Expanding on Pam's point on revenue, revenues are projected to increase 14% to $1.174500 to reflect a return to a normalized summer, including a 28% increase in beach permit revenue and an 11% increase in program fees. That's my commentary on the operating budget. I'll pause there to see if there are any questions before we move on to capital.
Pam, how are you looking at programming for this summer, and what does your crystal ball say that you might be able to do? Are you feeling like you're going to be able to get back to something close to normal, or is it still tentative?
We are so incredibly busy. I'll give you one snapshot. We had an opening registration date this past March for spring, summer. And typically, we take a typical 2019 opening day of registration, we brought in about $65,000. And that was a good number. This year, we brought in $213,000.
No kidding.
We are knocking it home. And even our paddle hut at this point still is alive and open and doing very well. That too came in around 60,000 the year before last, and this year we are up over 105.
Terrific.
Yes.
That's tremendous.
I
Okay.
think we'll beat our projections.
Okay, that's great. Before we get to capital, any questions for the operating budget for Dan or Pam?
Pam, on the program revenues, are there any price adjustments that we're making to the programs, or is this just simply an increase in the quantity that we're projecting?
Simply increase in quantity.
Okay. And then back on the beach passes, it looked like of the $80,000 increase, half was to price and half was to quantity as well?
It was an increase of $5 on residents and non-residents. And so we typically sell about 8,000 stickers. So you're looking at $40,000 increase there, and about just under 600 in a busy year for non-resident cars. So about additional 3,000 there, which is on top of the 25,000 non-resident. So it'd be just under 30,000 plus the 40,000 from the residents.
Moving on to capital, the capital request is $450,000, up from $127,500 last year. Of course, the largest couple of items were deferred from last year. The first of which is $250,000 to resurface the tennis courts at Cherry Lawn. The current asphalt courts would be replaced with post-tension concrete, which requires less maintenance and doubles the useful life to 30 plus years. I saw these courts earlier today. They are in disrepair. There's cracks on literally every court, and those are only the cracks you can see that haven't already been patched. So they are both unsightly. I don't know about unsafe, but certainly if you're a tennis player, you're getting a lot of crazy bounces from time to time. And those courts don't currently represent our town all that well. And I think those courts are overdue for that resurfacing. I'll keep going, and then we can talk about them afterward, if that makes sense.
Sure, go.
66,000 to repaint the tennis courts at Weed Beach. This item was in last year's discussion. It was initially reduced to just 3 courts by the Board of Selectmen, and then I think it was deferred entirely by the RTM. It's been 8 years since the courts were last repainted. Candidly, I saw those again today. I think it's 50-50 that they actually need repainted. Of course, everything looks better with a fresh coat of paint. These courts would absolutely look better with a fresh coat of paint. And there's a couple of spots that certainly are patchy. And I don't think the way that courts have been patched in the past is all that becoming. And I know that it's kind of overdue for this to happen. So I'm supportive of this, but it's certainly one where I don't think the town would suffer all that much if we waited another year. But on balance, I come out in support of this item.
Okay.
Pam, do you want to respond to that specifically before I move
Sure. Matter of fact, the last 2 years, Dan, I felt the way you did. And it was a recommendation from the vendor that they're painted every 5 to 7 years. But as we move into, actually, this will be our 9th year coming this summer. So some of the chipping that's going on, I think will eventually just get worse, and it may get worse at a faster pace if we don't take care of it. But I see exactly what you're saying as well. But
And I think that's very fair, and I certainly don't want to wait until they become unsightly to address it. I think being ahead of it makes sense. It's been in the budget for a couple of years now, and that's why I come out on balance in favor of leaving the item in the budget. The third item is to repair the gazebo roof at Cherry Lawn. It's a mess. It used to be under a couple of trees, and if there's a lot of green mold that resulted in moss and all that kind of stuff. And if you're underneath the gazebo, you can see holes through it. So it doesn't provide that much protection from weather. It's $15,000, pretty straightforward in my judgment. The next item is $82,000 at Tilly Pond to both dredge the pond, and since the equipment's going to be there already and it's heavy equipment, might as well address the overdue need to widen and repair the walkway. Dredging will address enhanced water quality and mitigate any algae bloom and other weed issues that could surface as that water quality deteriorates if that pond is not dredged. And I think there's ADA issues with respect to the current walkway that would be addressed by resurfacing it and widening it. The next item is $27,000 to add a second mower. I think there is a second mower, but it's not really workable in working condition. This would provide the crews with the opportunity to actually schedule 2 mowing jobs at the same time. I think the additional 16 acres in Highland has made that an imperative. And given weather conditions and we all know there's certain times when you can't mow, and when you can, you want to get it done. So having the second mower would provide the crew the flexibility to address the town's needs quickly. Then there's $5,000 to replace some trees at Tilly that had been removed, and then $5,000 for small capital. That's the list of capital requirements out of Parks and Rec. Some of these items will raise to discussion on bonding. Some of them will not. That conversation's probably for a later date. And that's it on the capital side. Pam, you want to add anything?
I will add on the mower. So there is one old piece of equipment that's 20 years old. And that one is not, we like to make that not mobile, like we leave it at Highland. We're gonna get a little bit more life out of it. They keep refixing it, this not, but that is really the third. The backup would be this new one, because we don't expect it to last very much longer, but we're getting ahead of this and also want to be more efficient with the ability to have 2 crews at different locations getting the job done. I think that's about all I want to add. You did a good job, Dan.
No, that's good. Is the Dilly Pond, is that not, I see it doesn't project out into the future. This is sort of one and done and not part of a regular program or something that would need to be addressed more regularly?
For Tilly, you mean for the sidewalks?
No, for the dredging.
For the dredging, yeah. As far as I've gone back to look, I cannot find when that was last dredged.
Okay. All right, other questions from the board for Pam or for Dan on Parks and Rec? Anybody from the RTM on that would like to ask a question or weigh in otherwise? Okay, terrific. Seeing nothing else, Pam, thank you very much. Much appreciated.
And thank you as well.
Thank you, Pam.
Frank, why don't we move on to general government? Are you ready?
Yeah, thank you. Did Paul join us? No.
No, don't see him.
Okay, well, we would have benefited from Paul too, but I'm glad Jen is on to kind of fill us in as needed.
She's our supervisor, so.
Yeah. So the general government's a fairly straightforward operation. The proposed budget of $3,662,000 is I don't know the percentage, but it's only up about $18,000 from the budget from last year. Almost all the departments are pretty much flat, except for very small changes. The elections area is down. It's a different electoral year, and then there are 2 significant expenditures that are different from last year. One is the part-time public relations officer that they're public information officer that they're looking to hire. It's budgeted at $28,000. It's a part-time job, 19 hours. This, I think, got a lot of discussion at the Board of Selectmen. Our little buddy group went back with some questions on this. We complimented the town in terms of its communications with the public, but the town people feel that there are shortcomings in what they're doing in this area, and that they could genuinely benefit from a part-time person who could provide sort of regular communications and frankly spiff up, if you will, the social media presence of the town. If anything, that's the main shortcoming. I'm a little cautious here because I know John's feelings about headcount increase. The good thing here is that we can think of it a little bit as an experiment. This is a part-time employee, no benefits, an at-will person. This isn't covered under the union contract. So if this doesn't work, we can drop it without it being a huge deal. We can see whether we get some benefit as a town from this. But I must say, Kate feels pretty strongly we will get some benefit, and this is probably a good town to look for someone to help on public information. But Jen's on too, and people may have questions, but let me go to the other item, and then if people have questions, we'll come back. The other one is an emergency services consultancy that people are looking to do for $45,000. This is a one-time a one-time exercise, although probably something that should be done every decade or so, where the town would look hard at the way in which it prepares for emergencies and handles emergencies. We were curious as to whether this sort of was hinting at some significant expenses to come. You know, they do this study, and what do you know? We have to do this and that, and the answer is no. We shouldn't assume that this will result in additional expenses for the town. This is something that we should be doing on a you know, as I said, a very semi-regular basis, but it doesn't necessarily presage any significant expense going forward. We also talked a little bit about council expenses. You know, they're off. You know, they're expected to be off because there isn't the COVID-related advice and counsel, but then there are likely to be some 30G issues, that kind of thing. So, and some of this is just a guess on the council expenses.
Francis, is the public information individual in the Board of Selectmen budget?
Yes.
Okay, got it. Okay.
Yes. And that's pretty much the entire, you know, that in the emergency services consultancy is what drives that. On the capital, you know, there are two items. One is a reval expense, which is, you know, unavoidable at this point, and definitely to be expected, $92,000. And then for one reason or another, I think the police department's server replacement is within the kind of information and technology part of the general government budget. That's $120,000. I'm not that capable of speaking to the importance of that. We've talked about, this has come up in other Board of Finance sessions. You know, Jen, do you want to say?
Yeah, Frank, I think they lowered that from 120 to 70, and I think we're actually funding that now. So I think pro forma, I think this is one that we're going to see come out of the budget, right?
Okay.
Correct. We're
Okay.
able to do it with the existing network hardware software funds that we have.
Okay.
Great. I'm sorry, what's the capital nature of the reval $92,000? What are they investing in?
It doesn't fall under the capital in that account. It falls under the non-recurring. So that's really
okay.
professional
That's fine.
services for
Okay.
reval.
Got it.
And this is the accrual of that over, I believe, every 5-year period, right?
Correct.
I forgot.
So we
it
took
was
the
in this-
balance that's available and spread the difference until the next reval.
Yeah, I forgot it was in this bucket and not the other. So, okay. Terrific. Any questions from the board for Frank on any general government expenditures?
Yeah.
Dan?
Just a quick question on the public information officer. The benefits to the town, would they be hard benefits like financial benefits or kind of soft benefits? And I know maybe it's hard to distinguish. The town cuts a better, larger, wider profile. Maybe that impacts both soft and hard with respect to real estate prices and commercial activity, et cetera. But was Kate or anyone else able to expand on kind of the type of benefits that they believe this will accrue to the town?
Well, I'll let Jen chime in here a little bit, but I think they actually just feel a general shortcoming in terms of communicating kind of governmental intentions and activity. Some of the surrounding towns do a little better job. This is part of it's a little bit marking to market in the community generally. Um, um, uh, uh, And I think also there have been some instances of kind of lack of internal coordination around communication, which has been kind of troubling. And, there'll be a press release that wasn't cleared, that kind of thing. So having a point person for those kinds of communications might prevent any kind of mishaps on that score.
Yeah, it's really aimed at having more effective communication, more thorough communication, and more coordinated communication.
I was a little worried that Jen was looking for a personal PR kind of promoter. And I was persuaded that that's not the case.
Well, we'll hire one for the Board of Finance to promote us to members of F&B. So we just need to work on top of that. So, okay.
Frank, on the emergency services study, met with Kate and a few others to discuss that and so forth. And I do think it's a very worthwhile project moving forward. It's really going to look at sort of, I think, our fire departments, our emergency services at post and police, and sort of look at, how they all interact together. I think it's going to think about things, down the road in terms of possibly bringing back the fire dispatch, look at sort of, how the fire departments and post communicate with each other. And I do think, given the importance of all three of those services, it's, I suspect it'll be a good kind of fresh look at how they all work together.
Right. And 45,000 is a little bit of a guess as to what the right cost here is. This hasn't been priced out in any kind of.
Correct. Yeah, they have not RFP'd it yet. I think if approved, they would RFP it this summer.
Yeah.
Terrific. Other questions for Frank? Okay, that gets us through all of our budget topics. But just to check, is there anyone from RTM on who had any questions or comments on general government? Okay. All right, I think that wraps up our session today. So we have a very busy session next Tuesday, March 30th. So for that discussion, we'll be covering police, we'll be covering Board of Education, school, town, and sewer debt, excess cost, RFC and RE grants, as well as the library. So probably a longer evening next Tuesday, the 30th, but that'll get us through quite a few items there. Appreciate everybody participating tonight and listening in. Anything else for the good of the order? Okay, fantastic. Could I get a motion to adjourn? Okay, Dan, second. Rob, all in favor? Okay, we stand adjourned. See you next week. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Jen.